of Ash and Flo. This is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome, everybody, to this most recent episode of the Unbillable Hours podcast. Other than Ash and myself, we have Costas Papaikonomou with us today, who is a colleague of Mark Cowan, who was in the podcast already, right? One of the co-founders of Happen, an innovation consultancy. But today, Costas, you're here because you have published, I was going to say just published, but that's not correct, right? You've published a new book about business development for professional creatives. And I'll let you say the exact title. And we wanted to talk about that a little bit. So thanks for joining us. And do you have to add anything to this introduction, or?
Okay. Deeply flattered by you asking me to join this podcast. I'm really happy to be here. And indeed, you had a fantastic session already with Mark Cowan. So probably many of the things I'll be talking about or sharing today will resonate or just sound like they're in the same thread. But yeah, not much to add to your introduction. Maybe the title of the book is The Magic Ingredient. And indeed, it is about business development for creative professionals or professional creatives, which is something that has always fascinated me. And I was responsible for, amongst others, for business development when we ran Happen independently. And I find it a fascinating topic, is how do you win business on something which is can be very intangible, like creativity can be, and how do you turn that into value, something the client will buy from you?
Yeah, and I think it's actually an excellent follow-on to the conversation we had with Mark, because with him, and you just told us that you listened to it. It was a bit of more of a storytelling and how it did work, particularly inside Happen X-Course, which was very interesting. And you in your book, you try to give people a set of methods, I'm guessing, right? So you're sort of codifying your experience or how you've seen it work. So would you give us a quick summary and maybe just point to some of the issues you're tackling there, because then a lot of this book is about sort of addressing misconceptions or busting myths, for lack of a better word. So maybe a quick summary and then call out some of the myths you're busting in the book, or
misconceptions, basically.
Yeah. Myths. Well, maybe we start with a few myths, and then I try to reveal why they're myths.
All right.
Well, I guess so. I'm a professional creative myself. I've been so for 25 years now after graduating as a design engineer. And one of the things which is probably true for many creatives is they basically bask in their own uniqueness, and they find themselves amazing. Creativity is like a black magic in their view, an art which, if only the world would recognize how fantastic their skills are. And really, that's pretty much not true. And also in the context of business development, completely irrelevant, because every client that buys creative services, and let's assume we're talking about a large corporate buying this creative services of a smaller agency, because that's, I guess, is the context for Happen Group. They have a choice. They have a choice of many different creative capabilities and agencies to buy from. And if anything, what works well is just being top of mind when a creative problem surfaces and being one of the last they've spoken to, or that you've triggered their intrigue. So uniqueness is, or that creative skills in itself being interesting is not something I would consider of high business value, and it's much more about the application. Maybe just a few other myths, which I indeed try to stay, debunk and then sort of explain how to deal with it instead. I mean, another big one, particularly for creative agencies, is this endless chasing of retainers, and basically trying to get a client to commit to like a year or 2 years worth of work. To be really honest, that's like the most awful type of relationship you want with a client when it comes to creative work, because you're basically you're cementing yourself into a construct which is going to be very specific about what you need to deliver. It takes all the room for flexibility out. It's usually an unequal relationship too. Like if a client cancels a retainer, then there's nothing much you can do as a small agency facing that. But also you attract a very different type of talent into your business, people who like working on the same client all the time, rather than people who enjoy working on different clients in different categories. So there's a lot of things that I believe make retainers not very attractive. A massive myth, which was a truth for me for a very long time, until I opened my eyes and I got red pilled, is maybe the expression in matrix terms, is this belief that people who are good at selling are bad at delivery, and vice versa. There is this perceived truth that there are people sitting in creative agencies, for example, who are just absolutely amazing at delivering work, and other people do the actual selling and chasing clients, etc. It took me a very long time, and I mean, it took me like almost 20 years of realizing that most people I knew who were actually very good at selling were also very good at delivering. It's maybe they weren't doing it too much at that point in their career, but originally they were excellent deliverers. And the people who were perceived as being very good at delivering were actually not very good. It's not from the point of view of the agency that is trying to run a commercial business. You tended to be over delivering for their clients and actually running projects at a loss. Now, for a client, that's fantastic. If you get way more than what you're paying for, of course you'll love them. But the reality for an agency is pretty bad. And what this really is about is, are you capable of understanding exactly what your customer needs, where a creative effort will help resolve the problem? So if a client needs a particular solution developed based on their problem, give them that solution. Don't give them 10 from which they can then pick. That's basically bad business, because you're spending 3, 4, maybe 10 times more time for the same fee. And the client will be just as happy because they got what they needed, even if they only get one, because they get the right one. Shall I go on with a few more myths? I mean, I like.
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe we come back to this through some of the questions we had prepared. So you mentioned early on in the book, I think, is the part I enjoyed the most, because that's a current pet peeve of mine, and probably you have already figured out a lot of the stuff which I'm just discovering as new wisdom. But this idea of you talk about how creative firms scale, right? And how you have to go from, being the seller doer, it's only you, it's your expertise, blah, blah, which probably that resonates with what you said, the person who thinks creativity in itself is awesome. Yeah. And then it goes over to, you get some support staff and direct people, so it scales that way a little bit. And it gets to the point where then eventually you hopefully sort of codify what it is you're doing, right? You build a true system where it actually almost becomes independent from your involvement, right? Yeah. And that's where the scaling really kicks in. And I just wanted to, to my perspective, Ash and I discuss this often in the podcast, is that many consulting firms, so professional services firms, maybe somewhat removed from the creative part, but they're also, it's also, you can be creative in accounting. They don't always reach that point, which is fascinating because it causes many issues. One of them being it doesn't scale. Others are, it's sort of difficult to market something as distinct if you don't have a distinct system or process. And I know from you both, what you've told me and both what Mark mentioned there, in Happen, you seem to have figured out the codifying of knowledge pretty early on, right? So how did that work, or how does that work in terms of business development? Do you build something that scales first, and then so you open the floodgate and sell? Or do you try and sell work quite a bit so you can learn what it takes to build the scalable solution or approach?
Yeah, it's if anything, that's like the $1 million question, or actually the $100 million
That's
question.
why I'm asking that first.
Yeah. So there's maybe one thing you do need, because I guess what you're also talking about is, even if it starts with one person, which probably sometimes it does, probably more often it starts with a few people working together, is it starts with the decision to actually scale.
Yeah.
And there is a very distinct point in the existence of Happen Group, which was almost on day one, where as a very, very small group of people, we already agreed we're going to build something that scales. Yeah. Because the alternative, which is also perfectly legitimate, is to build something which is, and our financial director, Richard Fifield at the time, he put it very clearly. He said, either you build something that scales, which is basically a growth engine, or you build something which is a vocational business, and you put your own names on the front of the building, and really you build something which probably looks like a small law firm does, with like these little triangles with a partner sitting on top and some minions below, which rotate very quickly because everyone knows the top job isn't available. But if you agree very early on you want something that scales, what you're actually also saying is we're going to have to build a brand rather than something that is completely connected to, let's say, the founders or the original, say, group of people. And in a way, you're still building triangles, but you're building triangles that grow. So you're continuously busy trying to make yourself. That's what any, say, services company, probably, at least as far as I could imagine, looks like when they're trying to scale, is how do you always make the top guys, the top girls obsolete? because whatever they do should be handed down to the level below them. And then all these kinds of things start clicking into place, which is suddenly you realize you're building a career path for people coming into the business, so they can actually grow up as well. If anything, looking at the history of Happen Group, I mean, we were not very good at hiring seniors. We had a few successes. We had also quite a few people who just didn't work. But what we were very good at was bringing people up to the top of the organization who actually at a fairly young age had tremendous responsibility and were doing a lot, but they were growing with us. Now, to your point of codifying, that is absolutely essential, because that's the only way you can create a business where it's not about a particular, say, 1, 2, 3 people being super smart or having a reputation and a little network of their own. What you need to create is indeed something where you've built credibility for a way of working, which basically, as a brand, you guarantee will deliver. So in the book, I try to explain those stages to go through, but it's a decision you need to make so early on to do this. I mean, I'm now, I'm heading for 50. I'm going to be 49 in a few weeks. Many from my generation, and again, I was trained as an industrial design engineer. Many of my generation have set up pretty successful design agencies, but very much of the vocational type, where it was about them, where it was about the, let's say, the partners. And after 20 years of doing that, you get really tired, and you've actually created something which is also impossible to sell, because what is this worth without you in it? But also the talent you've accumulated into that business isn't necessarily the best talent, because these people, if they stick around, it's because they're not interested in really developing, because they know there's always going to be this partner sitting at the top doing all the work and sort of holding the reins in hand. Whereas if you build a system which is indeed a brand and a creative brand that guarantees creative success, then it's a different story. Am I answering your question, Flo?
No, that's good. And I was just trying to get some thoughts from you, because I think it also goes back to this idea of business development and marketing. And like I'm currently in the process of not pivoting, but taking my firm towards working more with mid-sized consulting firms on the marketing side. So I'm talking to a lot of people, even prior to having read your book, like I'm doing that for validation purposes. And it's amazing how many of them tell me that they're not using these exact words, but they tell me that they actually do not want to grow. So they are afraid of business development because we are at capacity already, right? Full feast and famine cycle. Everybody's in the feast mode now because benches are empty, order books are full. They're afraid of growing. And if you get to the root cause of it, and then I'll stop us on this tangent, but the root cause here is that they haven't built something that scales. So they aren't able to drive more revenue with the same headcount, which is, I think, the point you get towards the more you codify into process and things.
Yeah, and I guess there are different types of scalable solutions, because, for example, we for like a decade, we also had our research team we called Winkle at the time. By the time we sold the business, it had become our research and analytics team. But that was also an organization within our business that actually had products. Things, and that's a different type of scalable, because the products we created, like concept screeners, segmentation studies, etc., those are fairly well defined also for clients, so they kind of know what they're buying when they see something like that on a pricing list. When you look at more consulting type services, then it is indeed about methodology, and it is about because when you have that, I mean, we could train up people so fast. I mean, of course, they needed to have intelligence and, let's say, genetically of the right type to understand what creative work is about, which isn't for everyone. We could train people up very, very quickly in the, let's say, 3-4 main methodologies that we used for project delivery. And then it really became as simple as just do it over and over and grow your network, and you'll become an increasingly valuable part of it. And that's how you scale, I guess.
And that's when business development becomes important, because now you have the engine that can sustain an influx of clients, right? Versus,
Yeah, but the best way to do this, by the way, and I'm a little bit surprised how you say some people are afraid of scaling, because
growing, not scaling. They can't scale.
Of growing. Of growing, because the one thing we were always doing, and which almost every year worked, was just to sell more than you can deliver. It's that simple. And then you have to figure out a way. Okay, so we actually now have work for 20 people when there's only 15 on the team. How are we going to condense this, make it repeatable, make it simpler? And you just lose a lot of the faff. I mean, also the scaling is, I think, often misunderstood for creating like a bigger copy of your smaller business. One of the things that has surprised me, for example, coming into a very large organization, being Accenture, is just how much staff is walking around. And the ratio between billable people and non-billable people is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. Whereas if you look at the agency we had before we sold, I mean, we didn't even have PAs. Yeah, we had one office manager over 60 people, but it was just incredibly lean and very effective in that sense, which also makes it just easier to scale. Yeah.
I think what you were saying in terms of scaling is that most people haven't read Jeffrey West's scale book. Basically, it's the same model over like different sizes.
Mm-hmm.
It's you have it like between 0 to 1 or 0 to 100, but the graph, the plot lines look the same. It's just people grow in a weirdly exponential way as opposed to in that path that should be for the organization, which is pretty much what you're saying.
Yeah, maybe. I guess one thing we in the Happen Group history basically ended or transitioned when we sold the business into Accenture. But there is a point, just organizational structure wise, and there's probably a truth in there in that it's kind of hard when you go beyond 30, 40 people, because that's also when, let's say, the top of the organization and the bottom of the organization start really disconnecting from each other. In our case, we resolved that by creating different teams. So we had like a team in Amsterdam, we had a team in London, and we were starting a team in New York. Actually, we had a second attempt at creating a team in New York, which would eventually also become like another unit of about 30-ish people. And then we would basically creating hubs and spokes, or whatever you wish to call it, within that model. Because it's a very nice model in a creative environment when you actually have the top creatives, the experienced people also still capable of doing delivery work rather than only sort of doing sort of a command and control.
Yeah.
So let's get back maybe to feeding all these people all the offices, because moving through the chapters of your book. So the scaling one, I think that was in my view the exact right point to start the book. I just love that, and then you sort of move into. I think the chapter is titled "Lead Thoughts Like a Boss," right? These are your quick thoughts on marketing and how you build relationships, which I think that's primarily the focus of your book. But do you want to discuss this a little bit?
Yes, and a recommended listening on the topic is your other podcast with Mark, who of course he did that so well. Because as a creative professional, an absolute must-have for I would dare say every individual in the team, but definitely as a brand, is you need to be interesting. You need to have something worth talking about. And ideally, you talk about things that are of interest to your client, which means you're not actually talking about yourself. You're not talking about the client, but you're talking about something that sort of sits in between, which is your common interests and where you share something. So thought leadership is also just being brutally honest. This is, again, if I do a very crude paraphrase, how we looked at this in the Happen days was being brutally honest that you don't know what the answers are, but you do know what are the questions that need to be asked. Okay, that sounds like a cliche, but the way we did that, which also was elaborated by Mark in the podcast, is we had different types of publications with different types of audiences with different types of content, where we were questioning and not say debating whether something was true or not, but just like exploring and questioning what we saw happen. And there were a few topics very early on, for example, when we started the business, when we basically set it up right in the middle of the economic or the financial crisis, I should say. So we were asking ourselves publicly, what is the impact of, let's say, this huge crunch on cash, also for people's personal lives? What is the implication of that in how they consume? Because, of course, we were a consumer products business. And just asking those questions and trying to find answers and being very public about that drew just tremendous attention to us very early on. And am I answering your question?
Yeah, no, it's good because it lines up the second thing, because you make this is maybe your main point, and I 100% agree, is that you talk about this in the thought leadership section already. You have a 2x2 matrix, which I think is interesting because you use it as a framework throughout the book, where you map the relationship status. So is someone a friend of ours, yes or no, right? Friend, yes. Friend, no, versus their need, we could say, like, do they have a creative problem we could solve right now, yes or no? And then there's by having conversations with the different people in those four fields, this is now me putting words into your mouth, but you seem to suggest that's how you build thought leadership. Is you just have to be in the middle of it, and you have to engage with these groups. That's how you find what you just said, the thing that lies between your firm and them, right? The area of interest, and it gives you something to talk about. And
it's also, sorry to interrupt you, but it's also completely different from just sitting out there and pitching your business.
Yeah.
Which is like, I don't know if you've ever actually had anyone pitch their business to you, but it's just awful. No matter how
I have that on
intriguing.
LinkedIn 6 times a week.
I mean, you're thinking, give me a fucking break. Just go away. I'm not interested in the pitch of your business. On the other hand, if they come to me with something that of interest to me, which is not their business, but something potentially they could do, or at least a problem I have, then all of a sudden we're having a conversation rather than this sales chat where I feel someone's just trying to get me to buy something from them. And that's what that 2x2 comes down to.
And I think this is really for the people listening who are not in the creative field of consulting. I think this is something you can take away from this book, but also I find just from product or innovation people in general, is this getting just insights from real people through real conversations.
Yeah.
Because what happens so often in consulting is we have a conversation, but it's with the partner of a business. And she has an idea for a research report we should do in order to build thought leadership. And so the machine gets started and everybody does their thing. Out comes a report 3 to 5 months later, right? 30 pages PDF. No one needs to read that. And it's entirely based on an assumption what might be interesting that did come from the inside of the firm, but not from an actual client. And I'm not saying that this is completely wrong or off. I mean, the partner does have an idea of, what the clients want, but to your point about being interesting, maybe it's not the most interesting version of it, or do you know what I mean? So yeah, I really love that point about the conversations there.
I'd like to add to that, because it's the same thing that people face with an internal or external communication. No one thinks about the audience. They think about, what do I want to say versus what do they want to hear and what do they want to listen. And almost every communication is like, me. This is what I say. Not like,
listen to all my fantastic opinions. Yeah.
Pretty much. That's an issue with a lot of partners and a lot of big firms.
Yeah. And so I like this conversation matrix a lot, and I wanted to ask you about, because you then pull that through into business development approaches and where time should be spent in which quadrant.
It's not exact science, Flo.
No, I get that, but that's my exact point. Yeah. That's my exact point. So because all the other things we've seen, like there's funnels, and then there's funnels which are flipped from bottom, and like all that stuff it's not how the world works. So what made you use that approach rather than any journey stuff?
Yeah, it was I guess it was very early in the Happen days, because I had come from different types of, let's say, service agencies. I mean, I worked for design agencies also in the past before that, to, let's say, the mix of people with Happen, and some of them I knew before then. I honestly, I just thought I've basically just been observing and what seems to work here. And to make a direct link to, say, like building funnels for sales and stuff like that. In creative services, one thing I noticed was the whatever was planned never became reality, no matter what clients were put on there, even existing clients who'd done the same type of business for a long time, where you think, I can kind of predict what's going to come in next year. When it comes to creative services, none of those, they were like, sometimes they could just not, you would look at what have I actually done by the end of the year, and what would I think I would do at the beginning of the year. It would just be worlds apart. But what would be never worlds apart is who's bringing in the business. You just know, particularly when you have a team of creatives, whether it's juniors or seniors, and in Happen, everyone had some responsibility for business development, even when they were literally fresh out of school. I mean, if they win 10K during a year, that's fantastic, because that's the first 10K someone has given to them to deliver something. But what you would see is you could literally draw like a little sort of diagram, say, okay, there's person X, that person is going to for sure bring in 300K this year. Another person will bring in 500,000. Another person will bring in 1 million. Another person will bring in, and you just know it because that's their sales potential as a creative. It's a reflection of how strong their network is, how smart they are in front of clients, working with them, and that you can build a planning on. Funnily enough, that's also why over time it became a fairly stable business. Happen Group from that point of view, because the people inside, we kind of knew how much sales, let's say, potential they had. In the book, I call it being, let's say, basically a warrior versus a gardener. Now, gardening works, and particularly within large accounts, you need the gardening types to sort of help keep nurturing it, and stuff will come out. But there is also the warrior type, who you just know, well, it doesn't matter where you drop them, they will be generating business, because that's who they are, and that's how they basically engage with clients. And it's a combination of everything. And again, back to the beginning of the chat, trying to codify that is hard, But if again, it's kind of the journey out. So in the 2x2, I kind of express indeed where you then spend your time. And what it's not about is looking for briefs. What you're looking for is making friends with people who could give you briefs. And it's just a double whammy, because you're spending time with people who are in the right place, who have opinions themselves, who inform your opinions. And the next person you talk to, whether that's in the same business or a different business, you've already become a more interesting person because you have more opinions and more thoughts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then when they do have a problem, who do they go to? They go straight to you.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
That's the point I wanted to push back. I don't know if it's pushback or if we're actually saying the same thing. But you write about, interestingly, that it's more about this type of business development or sales than it is about marketing for smaller firms, or for firms in the 30 to 70 probably range.
Yeah, let's say below 100.
And it makes
scale we're talking about.
It makes perfect sense following what you just discussed about the friend, right? People are so. The matrix shows who's a friend of us, but then in reality, these are friends with specific people in your firm, right? Which informs their sales potential. So I get that, makes sense. But as a marketing guy, my expectation would be that these types of friendships is actually something marketing could and should be driving. Like, not by doing some of the crazy stuff we discussed, like 32-page PDFs no one wants to read in exchange for an email address. This is not what I'm talking about. But I think marketing today is in a place where, because we have the technology, we could scale those conversations. So you're on the podcast right now. So if 12 people in my mom listen to it, that's already 30 more people than you could have have had this conversation with if it's just over coffee, right? So this idea, I think, I was looking at your matrix and I was like, I think 3 of those 4 quadrants should be covered by marketing. Is that too idealistic, or is that
we're
that
not
a
saying
grab?
dramatically different things? Let's be honest. But maybe the purpose of marketing is, and again, we've fallen down this trap. I've fallen down this trap. In an agency is, I think, too often confused with lead generation. And it's just not the same thing. It's not the same thing. But even though there's a hope, it is the same thing. So people will they'll spend like a whole year putting in HubSpot something or something similar together, being incredibly meticulous about all their inbound, outbound, whatever forms of communication. And then by the end of the day, they may get a lot more briefs, but these are not necessarily quality briefs. These are more like tire kickers and people actually you don't want to waste your time on. But and I think, and that's why I was also just intrigued hearing Mark say, what is it, back in over the summer, paraphrase the marketing activity that we did, because it was very much about supporting the Happen Group as a brand in why we are interesting to work with, because we're in touch with the right people. We talk about the right problems. We don't go in with a solution. We go in with how are we really going to understand? Basically, sometimes people who would be working with people who've been working in the same category for like a decade. They think they know it inside out, and for sure they know it way better than we do. But what we were always able to bring was, through all the exposure we had ourselves from other categories, is, well, you might know your space, but we just have this thought that there's maybe another way to look at this too, which can help you sort of make that step into a more interesting future with more interesting new products and just a slightly better way to service your category again. Yeah.
I mean, that I can wholeheartedly agree with, because that in my book is the job of marketing, is to create, not generate the lead generation and capture is just a technical step in the process. At some point, if I want to have a transaction, I have to bring in some contact information to that stuff. That's so tactical. The strategy here is to educate the market, maybe in a bit to create a demand to specifically work with us. So in your logic of the friends, marketing's job is to bring in more people who are very likely to become friends.
Yes, that's a good way of putting
that's it.
And I would never disagree with that.
Yeah, okay. Ash is shaking his head there, or no?
Yeah.
And
Ash, what is it, Ash?
Yeah, but perhaps
get it off your chest.
Yeah, I was just thinking, perhaps what we can talk about marketing is building influence capital. Demand generation, everything is another thing. You need to build this capital, but spend it in other ways, whether it be lead, demand, whether it be like Bizdev. But marketing is that influence, that space that exists, that real estate that exists in other people's brains, is because you've been talking about your stuff.
Yeah, but let me give you an example. So the last big, let's say, marketing push, because that's what it was that we did in Happen Group, was on the topic of sustainability. So this was because we'd noticed we had gone from zero say, projects or briefs related to sustainability were almost zero up to like 2017. All of a sudden, it started trickling in. And in 2019, we asked ourselves, okay, this is all fine. We know sustainability is a big issue for clients. No one really knows what the word means. No one really knows, is it true for their customers and their clients as much as for others? So we did a piece of research, which was exactly just to find that out. What we did know was this is probably not about the tree huggers, because they've already left your brands a long time ago. This is about what do you do with mass market who is still buying from you. And that was literally the marketing piece, was asking that question and just getting some first thoughts out there for the client categories that we serviced within FMCG, as in, here's what we think is going on, but join us in figuring it out. And that's then exactly that bridge from the marketing effort, which is building awareness, also to I guess to use, paraphrase back how you were framing it, Ash, is to create awareness of a problem that is very real for clients, and that they're not on their own thinking about their problem. And because, of course, sustainability, particularly say back in 2018, 2019, was like dropped onto people from the top. It was the CEO had made a pledge to do something absolutely insanely complicated and said it and promised it to the market in like 2 sentences. And people thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And then realizing, hey, there's a group of people whose job it is to help solve problems who are also in that space. But what we weren't doing was pushing solutions out. We were not saying, here's how you do it. That's what you should be doing. Here's a top 10 for making your brand sustainable for 24 months. No, none of that. And as a creative agency, because that's what we were, that was very much the, let's say, the formula is to be interesting because you're asking the right question. Sorry, I keep getting back to the same thing, but of course.
Yeah, but I like that because that is such an essential point. I mean, think about it, and this again is for the listeners. If the marketing people in the firms ask themselves, when was the last time you sat down with an actual client of the firm?
Yeah.
Right? Chances are it's been because they came in for a roadshow or you met them at an event. Fair enough. Okay, that's realistic. But did you have a conversation about the weather, or did you do some real discovery to pain points, interesting ideas, like anything that could actually inform your marketing campaign? And I mean, full disclosure, I'm totally guilty of this. Often the answer is no, I didn't, right? And it's easy to go 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year without ever actually having insightful conversations with actual clients. You get all your input that informs your campaigns from the business, from fancy dashboards, or from third-party research like Gartner or whatever. They have their own agendas. It's not real resonance from your market, or like you would put it, probably from the pool of people you want to become friends with, because that's probably if you do your job well, that's a very narrowly defined slice of the market, not whatever Gartner says is going on. So yeah, I really like to hammer home this point, and I think that's what makes the book.
And I'm going to hammer it one step further for you, because
please.
by having those conversations with clients, you're actually taking the topic 10 steps further than the stuff you would otherwise share, which they can also get from somewhere else. I mean, the trend decks, they all read HBR, all the stuff we are reading, they also read. Maybe they have to read it a little faster than we do, but then talking about it, that's what gets you to the actual issue you want to resolve together. I'll stop talking there.
To connect what the two of you are saying, it's like all these, like, you should not ignore all the HBR and all of those guys. They're just putting thoughts out, whereas coming in from listening Costas is to ask the questions, to actually have the dialogue and the conversation, rather than push the thought like the others.
The thing that has surprised me, and I'm assuming a lot of Accenture people will be listening to this podcast, is I just couldn't believe how almost no one I met in Accenture dared to confront a client without having a solution already in their back pocket. Just having an open conversation. Hey, what's going on? Where are you winning? Where are you losing? What should we be thinking of? I don't think that happens very much within a large organization like Accenture is and their clients. It's much more so, hey, here's 5 things we've done with other clients. Do you want to buy one too? That's not an open conversation. That's solutionism. And I'm not going to debate whether Accenture works or not, because clearly it works. But from a creative professional point of view, it's a different starting point.
And I mean, these conversations have their place. And there is a balance to strike between having open conversations, but then also we talked about codifying and standardizing parts of your delivery. You have there's a contradiction between the two things, and you have to bridge that. Okay, but I think to your point, so these can be different conversations, and the one you're describing, the open one, is very worth having just from a marketing standpoint. Just inform your own content agenda with it. If that's all that you do, you've already doing way better than a lot of the peers in the marketplace. Yeah. But so we're running up against time. I had one very weird question. Maybe you taught in the book, you mentioned throughout the thing, you mentioned having decaf with clients. Why decaf?
Yeah, so that's probably because there are two versions of the book going around. One is with coffee, and one is with decaf. And,
are you A/B testing the?
Yeah, a little bit. And so far, the coffee is winning, and decaf is losing. So what I'll probably do, because you got the version from Gumroad, there's a different version on Amazon. I'm probably coming to the brutal realization that the magic ingredient really is coffee, and not necessarily decaf. That's maybe not the answer you were expecting.
Okay. See,
but, yeah.
That's the product innovation people for you. Trying. All right, and then I don't know, Ash. I'm ready to close it. I just wanted to. I really recommend the book. It's fun. There's a page called Smart Ass Responses, right, which Costas pre-cooked for creative professionals. I'm just going to read one. I wanted to read several, but that alone is. It's fun. Like the book is not only helpful, it's also profoundly funny, which I think that's my point. And my favorite snarky response is if the client says, "What's your daily rate?" Your reply should be, "I don't know, and frankly, I don't need to care," which I'm totally stealing. Footnote: you can only do that if you've scaled to a certain point and are no longer completely married to the time against money game, right?
Yes,
I think.
But maybe, and as a final fight, the time against money game. Get out of there as quickly as you can. Every day wasted on just selling your time rather than your output, that's just, you're digging yourself into a hole you'll never get out of.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That was great, Costas. Thanks for making the time.
It's been a pleasure. Yes, always nice to hear people like my book, because I am indeed, I have an ego like any creative that does, so I like it when people like my work.
Yeah.
But it's been, honestly, it's been a pleasure. It's been a real pleasure, guys.
And I'll really say, so it's a fresh take. I found it was very practical, and I had to laugh at least, 15 times by skimming it through. It's good entertainment value on top of everything else. Ash, do you have a last question, or should we just cut it here?
I think we've got a lot of good insights right now, so I'm going to refrain from asking further questions on the podcast.
All right. So I'm stuck to the
Excellent.
Great. Thanks. Have a nice weekend eventually.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.